Have you ever sat down knowing you absolutely have to get something done, but your brain just says no? You know you should be productive, but you end up doing literally anything else. It's this universal struggle, right? And it feels like a failure of willpower. But what if it's not about willpower at all? What if it's about chemistry? Let's get into it. This slide, this is the battle inside our heads, isn't it? On one side, you've got all the stuff that's going to build your future. On the other, you've got the things that give you that hit of satisfaction right now. The problem is, the part of your brain that wants to game or scroll often feels way more powerful than the part that knows it should be studying. And as it turns out, there's a very specific chemical reason for that. This quote, which is kind of inspired by an old meme, really gets to the heart of the whole thing. We are talking about dopamine. Now, we usually hear about it in this negative light, as this thing we need to detox from. But the real story is so much more interesting, and understanding it is the key to actually getting that control back. So let's clear up some of the common myths right now. Dopamine isn't just the pleasure chemical. Its real job is actually way more fundamental. It's the chemical of motivation. It's what drives you to seek things out, and it all kicks off in a very specific part of the brain. Okay, so this is the nucleus accumbens. You can think of it as your brain's wanting center. When it gets a shot of dopamine from doing something, it reinforces that behavior, making you want to do it again and again. Now, here's the most important part. You can't just tell this part of your brain to stop wanting stuff. The nucleus accumbens, it doesn't respond to logic or willpower. It only speaks one language, dopamine. And that's why we need a totally different approach. And this is where we get to the core idea of this whole explainer. And it might actually surprise you. The goal isn't to get rid of your dopamine. In fact, to tackle the hard stuff, everything on that should-do list, you actually need a huge reserve of dopamine ready to go. Check this out. This slide shows a pretty fascinating lab study. See, rats with normal dopamine levels, they'll put in the effort, like climbing over a barrier to get tastier food. But the rats who had their dopamine depleted, they won't even bother. They'll just stick with the boring, easy-to-get food, even though they actually like the other food more. They just don't have the motivation to make the effort. And that right there illustrates the main idea. Dopamine isn't just for feeling good. It is literally the fuel for sustained effort. It's what lets your brain push through a challenge and work on tasks that don't give you an immediate reward. When your reserves are low, your brain just doesn't have the gas in the tank to tackle anything difficult. Probably the easiest way to think about all this is with an analogy. I want you to imagine your dopamine reserve is like a bank account, but for your motivation. So you wake up in the morning with a full account. When you do something productive, like studying, it's a small, sensible withdrawal. But when you jump into a high dopamine activity like scrolling social media or playing a video game, it's like a massive, impulsive spending spree. It drains your account like crazy, leaving you motivationally bankrupt for the rest of the day. And this slide right here shows the biggest mistake that most of us make. If the very first thing you do when you wake up is reach for your phone, you are basically emptying your motivation tank before the day has even properly started. You simply won't have the dopamine reserves left to power through the hard, important work later on. Okay, so if we can't directly control our motivation, and we've got to conserve our dopamine, what can we actually do? Well, the answer is to control the inputs to our motivation system. And it turns out there are 4 key levers we can pull. Think of it like this. You can't just will a car to go faster, right? But you can press the accelerator. These 4 levers are the accelerators for your brain's motivation circuits. By influencing them, we can indirectly start to steer our wanting brain in the right direction. So let's break down exactly how to use these 4 levers in the real world, starting with our emotional state. The first lever is our emotions, which are governed by a part of the brain called the amygdala. When you're feeling anxious or stressed or just down, your brain sees those high dopamine activities as a quick fix, like an escape hatch, and this makes you way more vulnerable to their pull. Your negative emotions are basically screaming out for that quick dopamine hit. So the solution is to actually process those emotions instead of just letting them fester. Things like journaling, meditation, talking to a therapist, or even just taking a long walk. They can all lower that emotional static. When you deal with the underlying negative feelings, those cravings for a dopamine escape get a whole lot weaker. Lever number 2 is value, and this is handled by your prefrontal cortex. You can think of this as your brain's CEO. It's constantly making these subconscious calculations about what an activity is worth. When you choose gaming over studying, it's because on some subconscious level, your brain decided that gaming has a higher immediate value. We can actually hack this with a super powerful technique called play the tape through to the end. The key is to physically write it down away from any screens. What will actually happen if you game for 3 hours, hour by hour? And then, how will you really feel at 5 p.m.? By forcing your brain to confront the real long-term consequences, you're consciously adjusting that subconscious value calculation. You're making the future pain feel more present. Okay, our third lever is novelty, which is connected to the hippocampus, your brain's memory center. Our brains are just wired to be more motivated by new things. It's why game developers are constantly releasing new updates and new content. That novelty triggers a much stronger motivational impulse. And we can totally use this to our advantage. If you've tried and failed to build a gym habit a dozen times, your brain remembers that failure. To overcome it, you've got to add novelty. Don't just go back to the same old gym. Try a new class, a different workout style, find a new running path. Making it new makes it more motivating. And this last lever, it's the most counterintuitive one of all: pain and pleasure. These two feelings are deeply connected in our brain's opioid circuit. Just think about it. An easy win in a video game is kind of boring, right? But a hard-fought comeback victory? That feels amazing. The effort and the struggle actually amplify the reward you feel in the end. So the key isn't to avoid all pain. In fact, that moderate, productive pain, like the burn you feel in the last few reps of a workout, that is precisely what makes the activity reinforcing. It's what makes you feel good afterward. So embracing a manageable challenge is actually a powerful way to hack your own pleasure system. So when we put all these levers together, we get a completely new way of looking at motivation. It's not about trying to force yourself to do things you don't want to do. It's about changing the inputs so that you actually start to want the right things. So here's your final toolkit. Protect that morning dopamine reserve for the hard stuff. Manage your emotions so they don't drive you toward distraction. Consciously assess the true value of your choices. Use novelty to break out of old patterns. And finally, learn to embrace the right kind of challenge. In the end, motivation isn't a muscle that you just need to flex harder. It's not about willpower. It's about having the right strategy. It's about understanding how your brain actually works and using that knowledge to your advantage. So, looking at these levers, the real question is, what's your first move?